risk statement. This presentation is for information purposes only and doesn't constitute investment advice nor an offer, solicitation, or recommendation to acquire or dispose of any investment or to engage in any other transaction. All descriptions, examples, and calculations contained in this publication are for illustrative purposes only. The risk of loss in trading, foreign exchange, futures, cryptos, and equity markets can be substantial. You should therefore carefully consider whether such trading is suitable for you in light of your financial conditions. Past performance is not indicative of future results. This is lecture 2 of the trend lines. In the previous lecture, we just studied the basic and traditional trend lines. Traditional trend lines require 3 points to be considered valid, as we discussed. One of the challenges with using trend line is having a consistent method of drawing them and updating them. Updating is more important because in this lecture we will study how we can make use of these trend lines, which is not possible without updating them time to time. For example, on the third touch that pierces the line, do you redraw every time or leave in the original place? Consistent method with trend lines. How about redrawing on subsequent test of the trend line? When do you leave it where it is and when do you update it? We also looked at the concept of best fit trend lines. Using best fit lines normally leads to inconsistency in terms of how to draw the lines same way every time. When do you ignore shadows or wigs when drawing the best fit lines? So these are the questions, and these are some. We give tests to few students and watch them how they were drawing the lines, and then put it all together. So you can see in the beginning everyone can draw lines like this, whatever you feel. This is the best fit line, this is the trend line, till that this was the trend, and this is the best fit line, and so on. This is a general routine practice at start. Similarly, these are the combination of trend lines and best fit lines, and then those lines are broken and then redrawn, new channel. We go live as well. I just want to show you some of the examples how generally people are doing it. To help address the issue of a consistent method to draw and use trend lines, we are going to now consider a different way to draw trend lines. These trend lines are called trade trend lines. Trade trend lines only require 2 points to be properly drawn. To draw a trade trend line, the 2 required points are the initiating point, the defining point. The initiating point is similar to the traditional trend line. Initiating point M is the point from which the trend line initiates. The second point required to draw a trade trend line is called the defining point. A trend line is drawn by connecting the initiating and defining points. To find a valid defining point for an upward sloping trend line, start from an initiating point that is at a major swing low. Move bar by bar to the right, connecting the initiating point to the next bar slope. If the trend line that is drawn cuts across any price action to the right or any future price action is below the trend line, then it is not a valid defining point and move to the next bar slope. If price action does not touch the trend line and the trend line is upward sloping, then you may have found a potential defining point. The defining point is confirmed when the bar after determining the defining point closes and no portion of that bar touches the trend line. To find a valid defining point for an upward sloping trend line, start from an initiating point that is at a major swing low, move bar by bar to the right, connecting to the initiating point to the next bar slope. If the trend line that is drawn cuts across and price action to the right or any future price action is below the trend line, then it's not a valid defining point and move to the next bar slope. If price action does not touch the trend line and the trend line is upward sloping, then you may have found a potential defining point. A defining point is confirmed when the bar after the defining point closes and no portion of that bar touches the trend line. So here are some of the examples, but we'll explain in detail the charts. But here you can see this is the initiating point and this is the potential defining point. So now there is no third touch. We don't need any validating point for that. So that's a proper trend line and it's a valid trading trend line. We'll further discuss how to make use of it. I just want you to understand, for trading, these 2 points are mandatory. And as you can see, this is again upward sloping trend line. So no data should be below this line. There should be no piercing bar below this line. There can be more and more and more touches, making it even more important, but it should not be pierced and the no data should be below the line. That's another example. That was initiating point, then defining point, and finally broke down here. But so far, this is a valid trend line, and that's upward sloping. Now, for example of downward sloping, similarly you can see this is the downward sloping and this is the initiating point and potential defining point, and we draw this line, and this is a valid line. Likewise, here you can also see this initiating point, defining point, and that's a valid downward sloping trend line because there is no data above this line. Okay. A confirmed defining point can become the initiating point of another shorter trend line. Now, this is very important concept. This is how we redraw more and more lines, avoiding the lines as we have shown in initial pictures which were not valid. So this point you must keep in your mind, and while you will be doing practice, it will become quite easier to you. I repeat again, a confirmed defining point can become the initiating point of another shorter trend line. Start with the confirmed defining point. Using it, as the initiating point and repeat the trend line rules. Move bar by bar to the right, connecting to the initiating point to the next bar's low. Verify that no price action to the right is touching the trend line. Confirm that you have a defining point for the new shorter trend line. So here we can see this. This is a typical example. As you can see, this is a valid trend line. This is the initiating point, confirm defining point. But we can see this is a third touch as well. So now this point, if we have to redraw a small line, we will use this point to further draw the line like this. So this is the confirmed defining point of second trend line. So the second trend line will start from this. So this will become the initiating point of this short trend line. Likewise, you can see this is the original trend line, initiating point, defining point, but on broader scale, we have to further cut it down. So now this point, which was the defining point, it will become the new initiating point, and from there we redraw the line like this. Similarly, you see for this line, this is the initiating point and this is the defining point. So now if we have to further draw the line, so this defining point of this shorter trend line will become the initiating point, and then we will redraw another line like this, touching this. So for this line, this is the initiating point and this is the defining point, and so on. Likewise, that's downward sloping example as we studied before, initiating point, defining point, and to redraw here we use this point, which becomes initiating point of this line, and this is the defining point. Once there is more history, we may extend another line accordingly. Likewise, this is same example. As you can see, initiating point, defining point, and this is the line, and now this becomes the initiating point, and likewise we can draw as many lines as required. So when to draw the trend lines? Wait to draw the trend line until the bar that confirms the defining point has closed or is nearly closed. Otherwise, you will be constantly drawing potential trend line that do not become confirmed trend line. Remember that the bar after the defining point cannot touch the trend line at all, or it's not a valid trend line, as we have already discussed this. And we have to wait. The new point is we have to wait till the close of the current bar, whatever the time period could be. During the bar is not closed, it's not valid because it may pierce down and made another low or another high. So in that case, it will not be valid. Yes, once that time frame, whatever it is finished, if it's 60 minutes and it's the closing of 60 minutes, then that's valid to draw based upon this. A trend line remains valid until it is broken and there is a valid redraw. If the trend line has been broken but there is not a valid redraw yet, then the trend line remains in place until there is a valid redraw. If a trade has been taken off a trend line, then it is not redrawn or removed. Please note this. until the trade is finished. I mean, once we have initiated a trade based upon any trend line, we will not redraw it or remove it until that trade is over, because we don't want to change our mind again based upon the trend line we already initiated. This is very important point. Okay, as long as a trend line has not been redrawn, then there is still a potential that it could trigger a trade. We'll see all these. Now, here you can see this was the initial trend line, initiating point, confirming point, and it was drawn based after this candle. After that, market made some more history and touched and pierced it down. So now this trend line is no more a valid trend line. So what we'll do, since it has extended the low, so using the same initiating point, we'll redraw the trend line. Now once we redraw this is the initiating point of new redrawn, remains same like before, and this is the new confirming point. Now as we can see, there is no data below this line, so this is a valid. And why it was invalid? Because it pierced down and some market data is below this line, making it invalid. Likewise, these are the other examples which you can see, and once we go for the practice and once you understand the concept, it's quite easy. You just need some practice how you will be redrawing the trend lines once it becomes invalid. Verify the defining point. Sometimes it's hard to see if the shadow or wick after the current potential defining point is touching the trend line or not. There is an easy way to determine this by drawing a trend line from the new potential defining point and connect it to the shadow of the next candle. If the newly drawn trend line falls to the inside of the other trend line, then obviously the potential defining point becomes an actual defining point. Here you can see verifying defining point by drawing the inside trend line. It was previous trend line, and this is the new trend line. Both are valid, but we use this defining point to make a new line, and both are valid because both are having data within the trend line, which is downward sloping. Equal defining points, as we have seen in many examples like here, these two are defining points for this line, and in previous slide we also studied what happened to the defining point when a currently drawn trade trend line is touched exactly and produces an equal defining point. The prior defining point, which was farther away from current price action, is changed to the new defining point, which is closer to the price action. Like this, you can see this was the initiating point, this was defining point, but it's touching two more times here, and as we say, more touches on a trend line, making it more vital, because if it's broken, it will have more volume because its strength is tested many times. So if we have to redraw trend line after that, we will not use this point, we will not use this point, we will be using this point. Alright. Likewise, you can see there are three touches on this line. It's one being the initiating point, second defining point, third So this is equal defining point. So for any further redraw, we will use this point to draw any line in future as bisection moves. When to move trend line? A trend line should be removed if it is redrawn and is not horizontal. I mean, if it's flat or it's redrawn, then we should not keep too many lines on our chart. Just a waste of time and doesn't look nice as well. It's abstracting, so we simply remove it, or if it's become flat or horizontal. A horizontal line doesn't show a trend, basically. A trend should be removed, trend line should be removed if it changes direction. Simply, if it's going upward sloping and suddenly it's broke down and becomes downward sloping, so of course we'll have to remove the previous one. That's past now. For example, an upward sloping trend line becomes downward sloping and so on, or a downward sloping trend line becomes upward sloping. Like this. Now, this was the previous trend line. It was upward sloping, that was valid. And now you see, if we draw this line, it doesn't make any sense. It's not showing any trend, it's simply a horizontal line. So we will simply remove this and we make a new line from this as market proceeds. Likewise, these are the other examples. It was till this history, and after that, once it's gone up. So, for example, if you remove this and make this line, it's not valid because it's flat. So we will simply remove this. Likewise, we have to remove reversed trend lines as well. I mean, it's going beyond flat, even below x-axis. So this is not valid. It was valid before. And now we'll remove this line and then redraw other line based upon if the trade is not opened. Otherwise, we'll keep it. If the trade is closed, then we'll make another line, and we continuously update like this. This is another example of this. It's going beyond. It's called reverse trend line. Below horizontal, so it will be removed. Assignments: pick a daily chart of your choice and choose major swing highs or lows. Begin moving bar by bar across the chart and draw every valid trend line. Each time a new defining point becomes valid. Do this exercise until you have drawn at least 20 valid trend lines. Before jumping to the summary, let me give you a real example. Let's do this assignment together. Here you can see it's a daily chart of Euro USD. Okay. So now it's upward sloping, right? So from this point, we will draw a trend line based upon what we have studied, which is this. If you further see, so it's a real chart of today, and as you can see, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 touches. So you can imagine how strong this is. And by the way, this is a current chart of 26 May 2021, and further we will discuss in lectures once this trend line is broken, which is already taking 5-6 times. So what could be the impact, along with some other studies. And this line you can see we'll also discuss in significant levels, which is second most important concept, and which is also again very rare. So this is how we draw this line. So we have to draw every valid trend line. This is valid. Now for the new line, what we will do, for the zoom in, we will use this point. This is the last sixth point which was touching this line. So this point will become the initiating point of the next trend line. Right now we will be based upon this because this is not over yet. Once this day will finish, presuming this day is closed and next candle starts somewhere here, then we'll make this photo. This we just studied before. So after that you can see there is no more valid trend line we can draw. Don't try to make lines here. As we've already discussed, it could be the target line. So right now we are discussing every possible trend line drawing. You can further, change the time interval as per your requirement and do it accordingly. But right now for practice, just keep it for the daily one. And of course, when you come to create, you might go further down. Okay, so Trendline Summary. A trade trend line has 2 points, the initiating point and the defining point. The defining point is not valid until the bar after the defining point has closed and no part of that bar touches the trend line. A trend line remains in place if a trade is taken or until there is a valid redraw. The trend line is removed if the trend line becomes horizontal or sloping in reverse direction. Please have practice after every class. That's very important so as to avoid a lot of concepts being added and later it might be difficult. Wish you all the best. Good luck. There will be 2 more lectures of the trend lines, so I strongly recommend all of you to do all these 4 lectures with massive practice, because this is one of the key basic concepts you need practice and it will be helpful in all other lectures.